Turning.
Okay, so thank you everybody for taking the time out of your day, evening, morning, wherever you are. Thank you to Danita and the Austin UXPA team for inviting me and also organizing all these really awesome events. I think it's a really cool opportunity just to get outside your sort of typical box and learn more about design. So, right, as Danita mentioned, today I'll be going over how to tell your story through case studies specifically. So in the UX lens and the UX portfolio lens and really digging into each of your case studies, how do we want to structure those so you are conveying what you need to convey, but you're not including too much information, but you have what you need, right? What is interesting, what's intriguing to hiring managers? And we'll get a little bit into my intro and why, my background in working with this kind of stuff. So quick agenda, I'll give you guys a 2-3 minute intro to myself. I also run a sort of mentorship online course structured approach to UX, whether you're converting into UX, whether you're a seasoned UXer looking to make that next move. I operate a company called Level Up, which we'll get just a little bit into. Then we'll dive into case study foundations. We'll go into organization, how to choose what work to include, understanding your user, and a bunch more stuff. The star of the show for today, and one of my favorite things, one of the most important things to recommend to anybody that's trying to fine-tune, tighten up their case studies, is this thing called POSI. So we'll get to that, really important structure. And then I want to dedicate at least 20 minutes. We'll target half of the hour, maybe even a little bit more, for a live review. So once we've gone through all the principles, I will take a look at a case study and assess it. So who am I? My background, I've got 10 years of architecture experience before transitioning to UX about 7 years ago. So studied architecture, worked all over the globe, got my license, and eventually I just decided to pivot right during the pandemic to UX. Also in my mentorship through ADP List, through other channels, I talk a lot about the challenges of making a career change mid-career, once you've sort of established yourself, you've got your license and all that good stuff. I won't read through all these, I'll let you all read through these, but the message is my career has been focused around design, whether architecture, whether UX, creative problem solving, and helping people, especially since I've transitioned to UX. That transition was really tough for me. I know it's really hard right now with the economy, and I really want to help people as much as I can go through that big life change that I went through. Okay, and then my goal today, ambitious for an hour, but to at least give you insights into your case studies that you can leave this session and say, that framework was pretty good. Let me take a look at my case study and see what I can do. Okay, so I mentioned Level Up UX. It's an online course through a program called Maven. So the real short version of the story is I was mentoring on ADP List for about a year. In fact, it's very likely that one or some of you might have been to one of my sessions. Give me a shout out if you did, that would be so cool. So after a year, thank you, Sonia. Yes, Sonia, yes, Sonia. Okay, I didn't recognize your name at first. Thank you so much for the shout out. So yeah, basically after a year of mentoring people on ADP List, I got a request to put a course together. It's for people that need a little bit more structure. The course talks about tightening up your resume, digging into your case studies and portfolio. We also talk about interviewing techniques, do mock interviews, organizing your job search, how to network, all that good stuff. We actually have a course coming up in a couple of weeks, which is going to be an all-day session and covering everything that I just mentioned. I want to give you all % off just for being part of UXPA and for taking time out of your day to listen to me talk. Feel free to check it out. Okay, so we talked about Level Up. The upcoming workshop, drop the discount link in the chat. Okay, now let's get into the main event. Before we do, does anybody have any questions about my background, what we're going to talk about today, Level Up, anything like that?
Yeah, you did it right. It was by mistake.
Oh, and that's a great point. If anybody has any questions as we're going through sort of the slides, feel free to drop a question in the chat. I'll try to check it, but it's better if you're comfortable with it, just coming off mute and asking me direct. Don't worry about interrupting me. We'll run this super informally. Okay, so digging into the case studies in terms of organization. I'll tell you a little bit more. I didn't mention anything about my professional role outside of Level Up. So I am the head of UX at a company called Zaelot. It's international professional design services and developer services firm. So we focus around tech and we create teams for clients to supplement their teams, tech teams. We're also a full service. Thank you, Tanita, for dropping that in there. We're also a full service design agency. So what I do on a day-to-day, aside from growing the design and working on projects and establishing our internal processes, is I interview people, if not every day, at least a couple times a week. I am reviewing resumes, I'm reviewing portfolios, I'm reviewing case studies, I'm holding interviews. So I want to come to the other side of that table with y'all tonight and just share what I'm looking for. Now, a little caveat, everybody's different. Everybody conducts interviews differently. Every hiring manager is looking for something a little different. This is what I'm looking for. So yeah, consider like a sneak peek behind the curtain here. Okay, so in terms of organization, and once we have our volunteer, I'll go through so we have a visual reference, but just high level, keep everything as simple as possible. Think not in terms of style, but think in terms of Apple's simplicity, Airbnb's simplicity, right? Google's landing page today versus what it was 10 years, 15 years, 20 years ago. Only include what you absolutely need to include to convey your point, whatever that is. If it's your welcome above the fold, keep it simple, keep it scannable. Highlight the most important work above the fold. That's a little bit tough when it comes to case studies, but you at least want to show a hint of one case study above the fold. So on your landing page, you know kind of what you're getting into. You have a little bit of a teaser. I really like when portfolios and case studies have one continuous scrollable page. Usually that's the case. Sometimes you see portfolios with different pages. You have the landing page, and then you click to the projects, and then you click to something else like resume. Usually resumes on a different tab, but as much as you can consolidate things into one scrollable page, i.e. your landing page, have your little welcome up top, 3-line sort of summary, who you are, what your unique selling points are, and then keep scrolling right to those cards or right to the list of case studies. Makes things real simple for us. And then in terms of choosing your work, so there's a real sweet spot here. You want to have at least 3 to 4 case studies to show your breadth of experience and diverse types of projects that you can share. Sometimes people have 7, 8, 10 case studies, and it doesn't really affect me as a hiring manager because more often than not, I'm either going to pick the first one, or if that's not interesting to me for whatever reason, or if I'm looking for something more specific, I'm going to scroll and probably just click on something random, unless there's something super specific I'm looking for. The danger as an applicant of including more than 3 to 4 case studies is you might have really strong case studies if you have 8, 10 case studies, but they're not all going to be your best work. There's going to be 2, 3, 4 in there that are just, you know, you followed the design process end to end. So my point here is, even though it's really hard sometimes to narrow it down if you've already got, you know, 7, 8, 9 case studies, really focus on 4, maybe 5, no more than 5, that really strongly demonstrate your work, because you don't have any control on what I'm going to select to look at, what the hiring manager is going to pick. And it's really unlikely they're going to look at more than one case study. They're going to assume the case study they pick is going to be representative of your capabilities, your work. So how to choose those case studies? Lean towards more complex over less complex work. What do I mean by that? Case studies where you are coordinating with stakeholders, right? You're collaborating with developers, product managers. If you're at a bigger company, you're collaborating with the content strategy team, accessibility, research, right? Show me that you have experience in not only creating your design and following the process we've all heard before, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, all that good stuff. That is baseline for your case study. But if you have the experience, show me that you have that experience. Now, this might not apply to everybody if you're coming out of school, if you're coming out of a boot camp, and you don't have that sort of professional experience. That's okay. Later on, we'll talk about ways to show off your strengths, even if you don't have that professional experience. But if you do, show that off as much as possible. Include as much measurable impact as possible in your case studies. What do I mean by that? We'll go into some examples, but instead of saying, in this project, we improved usability. Okay, that's a start. And if you don't have a lot of experience, that might be you telling the story about how you affected the project. The worst thing you want to do is just not say anything about it. At least if you don't have the data, if it was a personal project, tell me what would happen if this was a real project, if you had developers, if this was going live, right? Would you expect more sales? Would you expect a decrease in cart abandonment? Would you expect improved usability? So getting into understanding your user. So I'm going to slip back and we're going to do a quick Are You Awake test. When I say understanding your user, anybody that didn't just see this slide that I brought up, anybody want to take a guess at who your user or users are for your case study specifically? Feel free to drop a comment in the chat.
I would say like the hiring managers and the, let's say your direct supervisor, whoever, like the creative manager or the stakeholder, if it's a smaller startup.
You all nailed it. You captured the overall audience there, right? I was going to drill into you. Who is the reader? It's your hiring manager. It's the recruiters who are the gateway of the role, right? Before the hiring manager even sees your information, the recruiters are going to look through and just check it against that job description. Do they have this experience? Do they have this kind of experience? Do they have e-commerce? Do they know Figma? Do they know other things? Why I ask that is you want to keep your user in mind, because your case studies should be viewed as a product in and of itself, right? So what does a product do? A product solves problems. So your case study, the user is your recruiters, hiring managers, even your future teammates. Sometimes hiring managers share your portfolio to get their feedback. Anybody that's reviewing your case study to make an assessment of whether they want to bring you in for an interview or move you on to the next interview, right? So this idea of thinking about your case studies as a product is, what do we want our products? This is going to be kind of an abstract question, but I'll ask it anyway. What do y'all think we want our products to do? Very high level, not your case study, but as we're designing products, we're designing experiences. What is kind of like the underlying purpose of our role as UX product designers?
That it meets the user need.
Yes, and Megan, I'm going to ask you to, I think this is kind of an abstract question, but can you dive in a little, thinking about the user specifically? What are we looking out for the user? Like, what are we, in terms of the experience and flow? We want to take away friction. We want to make it simple, intuitive, easy to do whatever that experience is designed to do. So with your case study, the goal, and it's really a user goal and a business goal, we can consider the hiring manager, the business, and the user. We want to make it as easy as possible for whoever's reviewing your case study to see that Megan, Amna, Danita, Jessica, Izit, wow, this is the best candidate for this role, right? So we'll get more into that and how you can do that as we continue with the hour. But as a kind of a teaser, a start to that, you can start by including these key ingredients, okay? So I mentioned impact before, and I'm going to mention it again before we're done with this presentation. Clear, measurable impact using metrics, if you have it. We don't always have it. The company went another direction. You left the company before it was, implemented. That's all fine. If you have the metrics, use them. If you don't, we can talk about this more in the example, but talk about what kind of numbers you would look at, what data you would look at if you had it available. The key here is demonstrating that you know how to measure success in a project, whether or not it's actually implemented. You want to show that you know where to look and you know how to basically go back to leadership and go back to product and say, hey, our goal was to increase sales, revenue, whatever, by 10%. We actually got it to 12%, right? And that goes back to demonstrating value as a UX org, which is kind of a hard thing to do sometimes. That's getting into the weeds a little bit. So project context, you always want to talk about your team. So what was your role? Were you senior designer? Were you intermediate designer? Were you researcher? What was your contribution to the project? And who was your team? So were you working just within design? Were you partnering just with a developer? Were you partnering with a bunch of stakeholders? And that goes back to showing the hiring manager, okay, I've worked on diverse teams. I have experience with collaborating. Or if you're just not there yet, you're being transparent. Okay, I was one of two designers and we primarily focused with the developer or the product manager. So we'll talk about storytelling as well. I'm going to try to go through these a little faster because I really want to get to the live reviews. Okay, just flip what to do, right? So even if you don't have numbers, include some sort of impact or what your anticipated impact would be. We talked about the case studies, so keep it to 3 and 4. You want to make sure you're clear about your role and contributions. This is a big one that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people want to just include, I did this, I did that, I created affinity diagrams, I created 5 user personas, I created this user journey, I created this user flow. And what you get is a case study where it's like, cool, you did all this work, but you're not telling a story with it. And as a hiring manager, I am spending maximum 2 minutes looking at your case study. I want to keep things simple, and we'll get into this with POSI, but really only include design artifacts that contribute to your story, contribute to the case, contribute to what you're trying to convey. Okay, now what is POSI? What is this guy talking about? Okay, so 4 pillars. First one is problem. Second one's opportunity. Third is solution. Fourth is impact. So problem. Of all the problems, and thinking of the context of a company, think of a company like Google or Netflix or Airbnb or Apple or whatever. Such a huge, experience design ecosystem, right? So many problems to be solved. Why was this problem? Why was this case study? Why was this experience chosen to be created, right? So that's if there was an existing experience and it wasn't performing well, and you as the UX designer were asked to look at it, why was that experience chosen, right? What was happening? Revenue was too low, cart abandonments were high, et cetera, right? Opportunity. So thinking about that problem, what can happen if that problem's solved? So an example here is problem. Revenue is too low. Our yearly target for revenue is, we want to have at least, I don't know, I'm just making up numbers now. Let's say we have a less than 10% cart abandonment rate, but it's hovering at 15%, right? That's too high. You guys know what cart abandonment is. It's if you're checking out and you just leave the experience before making your purchase. So the opportunity here with that cart abandonment example is if we redesign our checkout process to simplify it, then we can reduce our cart abandonment back to 10% as an example, right? So what's the upside? This is where you start creating your KPIs or your goals for the project. Now, what is the actual solution that you created to solve this problem that we defined? The solution bit is usually the bit that comprises the majority of the case study. So that's, you're started with user research. You have an existing experience, for example, you start with user research, you gain insights from the user research, and from those insights, or you get data from the user research, from that data, you develop insights that influence your new design, you create updated design, maybe wireframe, maybe lo-fi, and then you go back to the usability testing, you have more insights, right? Create the user flow, create the user journey. That's the process all the way until you've created the high fidelity backups. That's the solution, the process and what you actually ended up with. And finally with I, impact. So once the solution was created and implemented, what actually happened? So going back to opportunity, we said with this solution, with this design, we could reduce cart abandonment by about 5%. In the end, if you reduce cart abandonment by 6%, that was your actual impact. And then you can say, woo, we actually beat our goal percent. Because remember, we started with 15, we were aiming towards 10, we dropped it by 6, so we actually beat our goal by a whole percentage point, right? So before I go into the example, does anybody have any questions about POSI and how it works? Okay, I gave you an example with the cart abandonment, but as another example, this is a project that I worked on personally while at Verizon. The problem that I was working on was as part of the customer sign up, there was very low customer registration rate. To pay your bill with Verizon, you don't actually have to create an account or register. But from a business perspective, we wanted to encourage it because once we have a customer's email, now we can send them marketing info and enter them into kind of like a sales funnel, right? So the problem was with low customer registration rates, we weren't taking advantage of potential sort of marketing opportunities. The opportunity was, once we solved this problem, we increase engagement, we improve CX, right? Customer experience. And that would be complemented by our target actually for Verizon was our existing email registration was right around 10%, and we wanted to double it to 20%. The solution was we completely redesigned the flow to make it more streamlined and strip out any unnecessary information that was causing a hurdle or a speed bump to getting that customer registered. And the impact in the end, we ended up with a 19% completed registrations, which doubled our starting point. That's just a real high overview. Obviously, your case study is going to be much bigger than that as you talk about, provide a narrative over those steps. And really your solution portion is going to be the biggest part as you go through the process that you use to get to the solution. I think that's the fastest I've ever kind of gone over stuff. All right, Brenda, I think your hand was raised first. If you want to go for it.
Hi, David. Yes, this is Brenda Sanchez. Hear me.
Yes.
I had a question on the case study. What kind of visuals do you typically expect with each of the case studies? I'm thinking through a lot of the past projects that I worked on. Unfortunately, I'm no longer with the company, so I don't have access to all of the great templates that I created and all the great slides too. So I'm thinking, do I have to try to recreate them by memory, or is it fine to just kind of talk through an example? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, Brenda, great question. And unfortunately, a lot of people find themselves in that situation where they left, there's layoffs left and right nowadays, so maybe they got laid off, they don't have access to the beautiful stuff that they created. So what I want to see in a case study, there's no like sort of one size fits all answer to that because it's specific to the case study. But as a rule of thumb, and we'll talk a little bit about this with our volunteer, our case study review, but I want to see how the artifacts you created, let's say user persona, right, or personas, affinity mapping, user testing, right? There's so many more, but let's just look at those for an example. If you created an affinity map, affinity diagram, and after you sort of grouped all the characteristics together and there's sort of common groups, you looked at that and said, oh, you know what? There's this group that I didn't expect, but this is going to influence my design somehow. Let's say you did some desktop research and a competitor analysis, something like that. And through affinity mapping, you saw that the most successful site has a blue background. I'm just completely making this up, right? But what I want to see is, and this is part of your story, Brenda, through creating this affinity map, you saw that the most successful sites have this blue background. And because you had that insight, your next round, let's say it was a mid-level, mid-fidelity mockup, included a blue background. And you tested that with the users, and that 5 out of 5 said this is great. So that's part of the story that you can tell me. Because I did this affinity mapping, I noticed that the successful sites had a blue background. I decided, because of the data, to give my design a blue background. To validate my decision, I tested it with users who then gave me the thumbs up. So any opportunity, any of your artifacts that allow you to tell a story, I would include in your case study. Any artifacts you have that don't directly tell a story, strip them out. And what you're going to be left with is a progression of your case study of how you got to where you ended up. The reason that's really important is we want to see, and by we, I mean hiring managers, right? We want to see that not only do you understand sort of the typical process and how to create artifacts, user personas, user flows, whatever, you should understand the different scenarios to create these tools, or at least be beginning to understand that. What we want to see is, how do you use those tools to guide the design, and how are you telling me that story in this very limited opportunity of 2 minutes that I have to scroll through your case study?
Yes.
What did we
Thank you,
create?
David. That was super helpful. I was trying to recreate each of the artifacts, but it makes so much sense to approach it from a storylines perspective and what makes sense to include and have visuals for. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, Brendan, to expand on that, you mentioned, do I just kind of describe things? The last thing I want to see is a wall of text. As a designer reviewing a portfolio of a designer, you know, we are visual people. We're all visual people. So you want to make sure you're peppering visuals, diagrams, could be charts, whatever, with a couple lines of text. So keep that in mind as well. So I saw some questions in the chat. Zit, I really hope I'm saying your name right. Do you recommend we put the POSI details at the top of the case study? All right, great question. We're gonna get into that in the review, but excellent, excellent. You're in the right spot. Roland, I gotta give a shout out to Roland. Roland has been to several of my ADP list sessions. So good to see you here. Roland asks, does this framework work if you're onboarded late or exit the project early and don't have the full case study story? Yeah, that's a great question. I would choose case studies where you have as many of those 4 things, ideally all 4 pillars, because it's just going to allow you to give a more well-rounded presentation of not only the case study and the project, but your sort of knowledge of how to tell the story. As a second priority, if you don't have all of the information and you don't have access to it, you could always be clear in your case study and the voiceover if you're presenting your case study in an interview to a hiring manager where you entered the project. So if you're entering halfway through, all of the initial research has been done, all the insights have been gathered, and now you're sort of taking those insights and creating mid-level mockups, prototypes, high fidelity. You can just have a one-liner. It doesn't have to be a whole story, but just say, look, I've included this work for reference, but it was done by the team that preceded me or something like that. In that case, you're at least sharing the story of the project, even though you might not have been part of the project for the whole ride. Roland asks, how would this work if you co-lead a project? Does it make you look weak if you don't do the whole process? Absolutely not. In fact, it's great to show that you're working with other designers, right? Even if you're co-leading the process. The most important thing is transparency. In this, again, it doesn't have to be a whole story, but just, mention it. And that can be in a voiceover as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the case study. But the most important thing is that you can intelligently talk about the steps, even if you weren't the one that took those steps. Okay, one more from Azit, and I'm going to go to the review. Azit asks, are there any major differences in what you look for in designer portfolios versus researcher portfolios? From a foundational perspective, no, because you can apply POSI to if you specialize in research, if you specialize in content, if you specialize in UX, if you specialize in visual, you can still focus on those 4 pillars. On top of that, if I'm hiring someone specific to research and we have a research team, I will lead on my research lead to look at the portfolio as well and resume, because they're going to have a deeper understanding on specific research tools, as well as specific, quantitative or qualitative research strategies. So that's really the overlap where my understanding of research kind of fades off and the experts kind of take over.
We have 3 volunteers.
Oh, yeah.
One is a manager, one is mid-career, and one is just out of boot camp. And I sent them all to your LinkedIn, so you get to pick.
Let's do mid-career. Let's start with the mid-career, and then I can stay a little bit after as well. I'm happy to stay after. Let's see where we get with the mid-level career, and then go from there.
Okay, so that would be Manaz. This is her portfolio.
Okay. All right, let me just update my screen share real quick. I have my first piece of feedback. I don't know who this belongs to. Because I was going to ask if who's is the person here that this portfolio belongs to?
Yes.
It's a mobile. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Manaz, first of all, Manaz, again, I hope I'm saying your name right. Thank you so much for volunteering. I know it's not easy, especially in a group of 20 people that you may or may not know. So big shout out to you. Excellent insight from Taryn, looking at mobile view. And you know what, that's something I did not mention in my overview is responsive design. Super, super critical. Always check, see what your portfolio, what your case studies look like, mobile and desktop. For me personally, tablet, intermediate, I don't look at that so much, but I want to see that you've considered a mobile layout as well as your desktop layout. So thank you, Taryn, for raising that. I've not seen this case study, this portfolio before, so I'm seeing it for the first time. I'll keep it high level and I'll try to keep it to 10 minutes so we can get to some others as well. What I really like is your intro up here. Very succinct, very to the point, but it still tells me what your strong suits are, right? What are you bringing to the table? Strategic thinker, cool. Data and human focused, cool. Lifelong learner, cool. What I would suggest here is this is easy to scan, so the format is great. I would bump up the typeface a little bit because it kind of gets lost a little bit with the massive text on your overall here. My comment for this line was going to be incorporate something that shows off your USP, your unique selling point, right? So I would, as a hiring manager, I would expect UX design candidates to be at least 2 of the 3. And for anybody that's going to be on my team, I want them to have a growth mindset, which is like lifelong learner, open to new things, adaptability, and stuff like that. So this, while it's easy to scan, it's not really telling me much about you specifically. And then as I read through, I see this really big kind of tagline here, product designer focused on ethical AI, behavior design, and learning experiences. Awesome. I like that it's bold, but you can afford to make it maybe about 2/3 the size while still having that bold effect and having that little teaser. This is kind of divisive, right? Sometimes people like just to have a clean above the fold here. I like to see a little teaser to your work so I know I can scroll down and it's, it's right there, right? Divisive topic. If you wanted to have a little bit of a preview, I would shrink down this text, keep it bold, keep it so it stands out. But what I really like about this is you really are talking about what things you bring to the table as a UX designer. So again, all this stuff up here, I can assume. I'm going to cover that. It's going to be in your resume. You're being a UX designer, right? But now you're telling me ethical AI is a hot topic right now, and it's important to you. You're focused on it. Cool. Behavior design, cool. Behavior design and learning experiences, cool. So I really like that you've gone into more detail about what you bring to the table. Continue. I specialize in research-driven UX, rapid prototyping, connecting behavioral science with AI to design tools that help people learn, grow, and solve real problems. This is great. I like the headline. I like the sort of secondary title as well there. Okay. But yeah, hey, better for us to figure out that it's a little funky here than an actual interview. So you're good. But that's a really great point with there being so many applicants to UX roles, hundreds nowadays. One little thing like that is more than likely going to take you out of the running because we're looking for detail-oriented people as well. Not always, it kind of depends, but the point is you don't want to take that chance. So before your site goes live, really, really check through and make sure everything's functional. Okay. And Manaz, was I right? Is the intent that you click and it scrolls down and you have an anchor that brings up your first case study? Yeah, gotcha. Okay, cool. So we'll just click on the first one to dig into the case study. So my first reaction here is really like the balance, the visual balance here. It's a little heavy on text, just considering first impressions, but okay. That's interesting. I see what you're going for here with the hover and providing more information. And the idea that your card here is full screen, so it's not like someone's going to accidentally go off and miss it. I kind of want to see what this looks like in mobile now. Okay, so this is a great point about looking at how things behave in mobile. The challenge here is you can't hover on a phone, right? Now, given we're not using a phone, and please correct me if I'm wrong if you have like sort of a tap, but even if you do, if you have a long tap reveals the text, not the best experience. So what I would do here, even though this works for desktop, I would just keep it a static card that's persistent on the description of your case study, and then replace. I like the imagery here, it kind of shows off your visual design skills, but what's more important is providing a preview to your experience here in this situation. Does that feedback make sense just on mobile versus desktop and how this is perceived?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
But I really do like the visuals. For your description, I would want to get this down to 3, maybe 4 lines altogether. So you want to make this really easy to be scanned, right? You want to provide a hook. That's where the storytelling comes in. You want to say something that's so interesting about the product. A lot of times that has to do with what you've got down here, which is great. 80% increase in user satisfaction, AI powered. I'm already hooked. Okay, so now we dig into the case study. My eye doesn't really, it kind of lands on the title and then it kind of gets lost between your subtitle here and the text here. So take a look at that visually. That could be grouping your role service duration, iOS, the project context a little bit more, providing a little bit more space. But I would take a look at this visually, right? Because right now it's all kind of coming together. Great. Leading with your mock-ups. And I'm going to assume these are the end result. Is that right?
Yes, the high
Great.
fidelity prototype. Yeah.
These are the high fidelities. That's great because you want to lead with the hook. As a hiring manager, I think these are great illustrations. I really like the color balance. I'm curious, so I'm going to keep scrolling, right? Okay, and I'm gonna go through real quick because I want to get to at least one other one. Really text heavy with the overview, challenge, and solution. So what I really like is that with the overview, reading really quickly here, you're providing context. Challenge reminds me of the problem in POSI, so that's great. And then solution, you're giving, kind of a overview of what the solution is, all ahead of really going into the process. I really do like the one glance approach. As someone who's trying to understand what the case study is, bringing everything to the top is really cool, but I would make it more concise. Make it punchy. Overview, 1, maybe 2 sentences. Challenge, 1, maybe 2 sentences. Try to get it to 3 or 4 lines. And then you're continuing to hook with the result. So did you do the visuals yourself, the illustrations?
The illustrations are from an app called Human. I did change them based on the design and make them customized for the app.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to create everything from scratch yourself for your portfolio, for your case studies, right? You did choose the colors, and there's a really nice color balance that goes well with the illustrations. Manhas, this is a great example. You have a lot of great work here, and I get an understanding, okay, prototypes and sketching and all that good stuff. But from a hiring manager's perspective, there's a lot to scan through and understand your process. So what I would do if you were going to go back and tweak your portfolio, your case study, I would keep this in mind. Similar to the example before with considering the artifacts that led you to insights that informed the final result, I would read back and consider what things led you to find that final result, right? And there's things you can do. You could either strip out everything else that doesn't get you to that final result, or you can have it collapsed. And if the hiring manager wants to read more, the information is available, but it's up to them to open it, to kind of, if it's an accordion or something like that, right? So if they do just want to scan, they can scan, and you've curated what they're looking at when they're scanning. So you've already decided what's critical in telling that story versus what's secondary and collapsed.
I will do that, definitely. Thanks.
Thank you again for volunteering, and it's a really great site. I would just lean on skimming it out and only keeping what's critical to tell the story, and the text. See if you can skim through and just really make the text as concise as possible.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, Sonia, I see your hand up.
Yeah. Hey, David, thanks for doing this. I just wanted to ask Manaz if she wanted some subject matter expertise for feedback on this as well. I'm a dietitian and health educator, and I worked a lot with counselors. And this is a really great type of case study. So if you've worked with anyone on campus, like the dietitians in the wellness program or counselors, because body image is a huge part of the problem for all women, especially women in college. I also noticed that a lot of your drawings were like with brown skin, so I don't know if there was a focus on a specific group of people, but if you've done any of that type of collaboration or working with subject matter persons in this project, I would also bring that out as well, because this is the kind of research that really is meaty and would be very helpful in those types of jobs.
Thank you, Sonia. Yeah, the target audience were college students, especially Gen Z. and I did the research in the university, and the app is under development right now. Thank you so much.
All right, these are great. Denita, do you have time to do one more? I'm happy to stay on for another 10, 12.
I think I don't have to be anywhere, and I'm sure everybody will find it helpful. I thought this review was very helpful. I think our two other volunteers, one is Taryn, who is a manager, and the other one is Katie, who is just out of boot camp.
What I'd like to do is look at Katie's, because I think there's more of a difference between a just out of boot camp portfolio and the mid-level than the mid-level and manager. I think coming out of boot camp presents its own challenges without having the real world experience that I'd like to dig into.
Okay, I will paste the link in the chat. Oh,
You
you
mean
have
this
it.
one?
Okay. Yeah, that one. I forgot I already sent it to you too.
No, it's okay. And before we dig in, I see y'all's messages. I see a lot of volunteers in here. Guys, feel free to, well, I'll share my ADP list link as well. I'll share some information, ways to get a hold of me. I'm happy to meet and do a review for you as well, just for being part of UXPA and just for being interested. So don't worry, we'll get to Katie. I'll share some information how to get a hold of me, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so y'all can see my screen here.
Yes.
Okay, and have we got Katie here? Katie's in the house. All right, Katie, thank you so much for volunteering. I know it's sometimes
That's
not
me.
easy, so it's great. Okay, so first impressions, I really like the dark approach. You don't necessarily need to, a lot of people have sort of like a white background, light version. I think this is great. This is more my personal style and preference than a hard rule, but I don't like to see much decoration. Again, it's more of a personal preference, but that just goes back to like really liking the Apple style simplicity, clean, but that's not saying that you have to get rid of the decoration. I think it's kind of cool. And I think you've established a language between your icon, right, and the geometry of that here too, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we got Katie, maximize feedback, optimize flows, design better. I can fix that for you. Okay, very cool. I really like the succinctness, the conciseness, but similar to before, I'm not really getting much about your unique selling point here, right? So these are things like, yeah, okay, you're a UX designer. We rely on feedback. We want to look at flow optimization, design better. I'm glad that you have it, because I see a lot of people, especially people coming out of boot camp, that don't even just say their name. Hi, I'm Katie, UX designer.
These are things I should be doing as my job, so make them personalized.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd rather see this than nothing, because it shows me like, okay, your head's in the right spot. You're thinking about what you should be doing. Yes, Katie, exactly right. So if there's something, and I know you're early in your career, having just come out of a boot camp. So you went to the boot camp and now you're transitioning into the UX profession.
Yes,
Is
my
that-
internet is,
yeah.
we just had a hailstorm right here, so I'm cutting
Yes,
it out.
David, we have severe weather here in Austin, and so the storm has been slowly moving across the city.
Oh man, okay, that's fun. So what I would do, the reason I asked is coming out of a boot camp and entering UX, you haven't really figured that out yet, right? You're kind of experimenting. But if you do feel like you have some areas within UX you want to focus on, the last example was looking into ethics and AI, right? So something like that tells me, you know, there's UX, but then there's like this subset. And now I know kind of what you're more interested in. It's not telling me that you only want to do this, but it's saying, hey, if you've got a project that focuses on this, I'm your person because I'm really interested in it. I've done this work, blah, 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 right? Okay, so going into projects, I always tell people, don't need to say projects. If you have it in your menu, I don't think you need to here. What I would do, because all this is above the fold, I would actually say, instead of I can fix that for you, which I love as like a, you know, slogan, I would include something that says, view my work or something like that with a little arrow that does something similar to what the other site does, right? So you click and then you're anchored up here and you're brought to your case studies. Okay, so we've got 4 case studies, really hit that sweet spot. That's great. I like the visuals. I would add a little more information about what each case study is about. So similar to the last example, we had some images, and I like the images here kind of introducing at a high level what's going to be about, but 1 or 2 lines just talking about it, giving me context. What's bar 1? Is it a, an app to reserve a seat at, the latest, trendiest bar? Is it kind of, I don't know, an app for organizing happy hours? I can guess because of the imagery, but I really don't know. And I really want to at least see a title and a couple lines. So I see the title here, but just a couple lines talking about what each case study is. So I'll click into that, just being the first one. So responsive how-to website for young adults to learn how to bartend. Okay, very cool. Short and sweet with the context. Very good. Solo project, served as researcher, UX, UI. Approach it more of like listing your roles as opposed to listing the process of a UX project. Okay, so problem, you outline the problem. This is great, really great. Background, okay, bartending school. Yeah, and this also feels like a little bit of a continuation of the problem, right? The problem, if I'm scanning through this and understanding, is that bartenders don't make a lot of money, but bartending school is expensive. So how can we provide something that solves this problem, right? Makes learning how to bartend more accessible. And then, okay, you're citing, don't need to cite the sources. It just gets in the way, really. It's distracting from the case study. I have seen case studies that do cite sources. I would just bring it all the way to the bottom. Similar to something you would see in a book with a footnote, have a little 1, bring it all the way to the bottom, cite your sources, and you're not sort of interrupting the flow of your case study. So research goals, methodologies, 3 different methods, survey competitive analysis, go into the survey, helpful information, glean, 13 people. Okay, this is great, Katie. So you did your survey and you're outlining insights already here. So the most helpful information gleaned from the survey was that of the 13 people surveyed, all of them started bartending in the 20s. Portions of memorizing builds are the most difficult to master. Cool. That's a great, especially coming out of a boot camp, distilling that information and showing that you're gathering insights from the data from the survey. Really good. These bits of information already narrowing in on the main flow. Very cool. Competitive analysis. I really like that you're linking to the spreadsheet here and not embedding it into the case study. So this actually aligns really great with what we were talking about previously with the case study being a little bit long and having to choose what to remove from it. You can also just link out, right? Similar to that suggestion of establishing an accordion that the hiring manager can expand and view more information. You can also link out to information. The hiring manager can choose to check it out. They can keep going, right? But you've provided the information. So really good insight there. Okay, so you have the logos and you have sort of high level assessments. And then you went into more detail using strengths, weaknesses, or SWOT strategy. And this is really good. Interview findings, so you're highlighting the pain points. Now that you have the pain points, you develop the persona. Gonna go a little bit faster here. Something that's really important is making sure whatever artifacts you include, making sure they're not fuzzy, making sure they're high res and legible. We want to make sure our case studies are nice and clean. And sometimes that means recreating some information. Completely worth it, in my opinion, to have that nice, crisp visual in there. So, Katie, this is great. You're following the overall process. You even go in, you've created a color scheme, you've created typeface. You basically have a design guide, design system, which is awesome. High fidelity. Yep. Okay, cool. So let me just see at the end, learned a lot. Okay. So overall, there's a lot of information here. So it's great that you've done it. And I completely understand as well, you know, in my earlier years in UX, I wanted just to show, look at all this stuff I did. Look, I want you to know that I know how to do all these things. And it's really hard skimming that down, narrowing that down, right? So my suggestion to you is you've got the bare bones, right? You have the general idea, you have the progression right. I would ask you to go through and just really think to yourself, every item, every artifact that you have, your insights from the interviews, your persona, you had a massive sort of spaghetti bowl of wireframes, right? Ask yourself, how is this contributing to the story I want to tell? And that goes back to the initial problem and solving that problem. And really stripping all the superfluous information out is going to help make your case study much more concise. So from a structural perspective, that's what I would suggest. I also really want you to look at the visual aspect of your case study. In terms of organization, I think sequentially you're doing the right thing, but I really want to see this be more visually intriguing. So right now it almost kind of looks like you're writing a report or a paper. The information's there, but I want to see your strength as a designer come out in this case study as well. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a list of links of case studies and portfolio sites that I really like that I think do hit the mark in terms of visual, and I'd be happy to send that to you. But really good stuff, especially for having just finished a boot camp. You really have some strong foundations here of your case study. Buddy, yeah, no, this is Katie. Really well done, and you're really showing your chops with understanding the UX process here. I talked about staying in touch. So there's one more thing that I want to share, and that's the best way to hear from me. So I have a weekly newsletter where I have UX job search tips. I have just talking about stuff, UX trends, and I'll announce when I'm doing my ADP list free sessions, and I announce when I'm doing stuff with the course. So I'm going to drop that in there. Within that are links to my LinkedIn. There's a LinkedIn group. That's the main source of everything, like getting in touch with me. So again, y'all, it's been great. Feel free to reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn. Danita, thanks again for inviting me. I hope you all found this helpful.